Hey everybody, welcome to this special edition of the FreeMan Show. This episode is especially important because between the first episode and this one, we will be done covering the fundamental rhetoric, which means that we can get on with the fun stuff. The show following this episode is going to be a lot more free-flowing, and I encourage everyone to engage, comments, email me, get in contact with me in some way and give me feedback about the show, things you would like to see adjusted, maybe content that you would like to see discussed, your thoughts and feelings in regard to the information that I present and the way that I present it. This episode is focused entirely on the Hermetic Principles, which are absolutely crucial to developing a clear working understanding of how the universe actually operates. Natural law, as it's been mentioned a couple of times on the show thus far, is composed primarily of the Hermetic Principles. We find ourselves, at the time that I'm recording this, in the midst of the apocalypse. This is a good thing. We should be grateful for this. Happy to be alive during this very exciting time. The word apocalypse has developed connotations that are not in alignment with its actual meaning. Cataclysm is considered synonymous with apocalypse. And that's just not the case. The word apocalypse, if we look at the etymology, the roots of the word apocalypse are from the Latin apocalypsis, which means revelation, or the Greek apocalyptine, which means to uncover, to disclose, to reveal. We're going to talk about natural law, primarily the Hermetic Principles. The Hermetic Principles are called thus because, according to legend, which I tend to entertain, generally speaking, these principles were orated or passed down to man by Hermes, who is the messenger of the gods, and who, according to legend, has incarnated in various forms over time, including Hermes Trismegistus and Thoth. Also, a hermetic seal is a seal that is airtight. And that's what these principles are. They are airtight. These laws exist throughout creation. They cannot be subverted or avoided. They cannot be changed. They are eternal, immutable laws. Most of this episode's presentation is almost word for word from Mark Passio's presentation on the same topic, which I have a link to in the description. If you find that my presentation style is not necessarily palatable, I will link to Mark Passio's presentation on this same topic, because this presentation that I have for you today is pretty much verbatim from his, more or less. I'm only doing this because I want to have the fundamental rhetoric associated with the knowledge that I present included in my channel. Before we jump into that, I want to plug my book, You Are Not the Boss of Me, A Primer for Human Freedom, which is available on Amazon. There's a link to that in the description as well. A lot of the content that a lot of the knowledge that we discuss on my channel is included in this book. Kind of wrote it as reference material for the channel. All right, so I think we're ready to get started. Let's jump right into the Hermetic Principles. The word principle is derived from the Latin principia, which means first, foremost, leading, chief, most necessary. First things first. All activities or endeavors are meaningless without principles. Meaningful efforts must be based in principles. Natural law is expressed through 7 basic underlying principles, plus an 8th principle which binds the other 7 together. These principles constitute a master key through which universal wisdom is unveiled or de-occulted. This universal wisdom includes the knowledge of the requirements to obtaining what we desire. So the first principle, the first Hermetic principle, again, remembering that principle means first, foremost, leading, chief, most necessary. The first Hermetic principle is the principle of mentalism. The all, the totality of creation, is mind. Everything in creation is preceded by thought. All phenomena exist in the mind prior to manifestation. Creation itself is a manifestation of the mind of the Creator. Thoughts lead to the manifestation of all things. Events, phenomena, forms of all kinds. Thoughts create conditions. Thoughts create our state of existence and the quality of our experience here on earth. Therefore, it behooves us to be responsible for everything that we think, because what we think is the force behind all of our emotions and actions. This practice of being responsible for everything that we think, and thus everything that we feel and all of the actions that we choose, is what I call pruning the garden of the mind. Because the more that you tend to the seeds that are growing in the soil of your mind, the more you'll find fruitful thoughts, emotions, and behaviors stemming out of the soil of your mind. It's a process that requires mindfulness and due diligence. Like, you have to really actually get on top of your own mind every day and pay attention to the thoughts and emotions that are arising, and intentionally choose which thoughts and emotions that you agree with and which ones you don't agree with. And the ones that you don't agree with, you kind of like firmly pluck those thoughts and emotions out of your mind. And the next time they come up, you do the same thing. It's like weeding your garden. And eventually those kinds of thoughts and emotions will not arise anymore. This is programming the subconscious, and we'll talk a little bit about that in the next episode. But first and foremost, we must be responsible for everything that we think, because it is from our thoughts that everything else that we do comes forward. The second Hermetic principle is the principle of correspondence. That which is above is like to that which is below. That which is below is like to that which is above. The macrocosm, the very large, the totality, the score, and the microcosm, the very small, atom, are reflections of one another. The universe is holographic. It is self-similar across all scales, or fractal. The principle of vibration, the third principle. Nothing ever fully rests. Everything vibrates. At the most fundamental level, the universe and everything in it is pure vibratory energy. Everything which comprises it, not things that are in it. There's no distinction between the universe and the forms that inhabit the universe. The universe is comprised of all the forms within it. And those forms, all of them, are, at their most fundamental level, pure vibratory energy, which manifests itself in a multitude of ways, all the endless forms. As such, the universe has no solidity. Matter is energy in a state of vibration. The fourth principle is the principle of polarity. Everything is dual. Everything has poles. Everything has its pair of opposites. Opposites are identical in nature, but different in degree. Extremes meet. All paradoxes may be reconciled. The fifth Hermetic principle is the principle of rhythm. Everything flows out and in. Everything has its tides. All things rise and fall. The pendulum swing manifests in everything. The measure of the swing to the right is the measure of the swing to the left. Rhythm compensates. However, it is imperative that we note here that this principle and the way in which other principles manifest are tendencies for the unfolding of phenomena in the universe. That you can violate these principles, but there will be consequences that you will experience. When considering the principle of rhythm as it relates to our predicament for the last however long it's been, that things have been all fucked up, there is a tendency of the existing inertia of systems to perpetuate those systems. But that doesn't mean that existing evils are necessary and eternal. It simply means that the inertia of those evil systems is being perpetuated. That inertia is perpetuating those evil systems. And that an individual can themselves exert a certain degree of effort in order to extricate themselves from the inertia of those systems and begin to move the vibratory rhythm of their life in a way that is outside of the inertia of these evil systems that most people are still entrapped in. What I mean to say is that the knowledge of these principles, the knowledge of natural law, will allow you to rise above the tendencies of many of these principles. That doesn't mean that you can, that you are above natural law. It just means that while most people are sort of trapped in the gravity well of the tendency of existing systems to perpetuate themselves, you can, through this knowledge and integration of it and then application of it, rise above these tendencies in order to extricate yourself from the deterministic paradigm that manifests when you find yourself caught in the current of the inertia of existing evil systems. I think of it with the principle of rhythm. I think of like my apathetic and self-destructive tendencies that I embodied a few years ago as being like these low vibration pendulum swings. And through my concerted efforts, I was able to bring the pendulum up into higher planes and start operating within similar rhythms, but at higher frequencies. So I no longer engaged in those self-destructive behaviors. Instead, I found like, a pendulum swing of balance in regular diet and exercise practice and consistent meditation, things like that. Things that were not self-destructive, things that were actually nourishing me and facilitating my personal development. we're not stuck in the ruts of our habits. We can, through concerted effort, move that pendulum swing up into a higher place so that the rhythm then sits at a higher vibrational frequency. The sixth.
Hi Scott, how are you? Well, thank you so much.
The sixth Hermetic principle is the principle of cause and effect. And this is the big one. This is the one that we need to focus on the most. This principle is particularly relevant to the human condition, particularly relevant to the situation that we have found ourselves in for quite some time. A situation that we currently, as I'm recording this episode, are actively working ourselves out of. But it's still relevant. This is still stuff that you want to know and be able to integrate and put into practice in your life. So the sixth Hermetic principle is the principle of cause and effect. Every effect has its cause. Every cause has its effect. Everything happens according to law, natural law. Chance is but a name for law not recognized. There are many planes of causation, but nothing escapes the law. You can violate natural laws, as I mentioned before, but you will experience the consequences of those violations of natural law. And what makes the lessons learned hard at times is that if you were to violate a natural law and immediately experience the consequences, it would be very easy for you to make the connection of, oh, okay, I violated this natural law and experienced this consequence, and so I'm less inclined to do that. Such as when you touch a hot stove and burn yourself. You immediately experience the consequences of the action. You're like, I don't want to do that anymore. That's not great. Things like if you were to do something shitty to someone, just like pull a shitty trick, pull one over on someone, and that results in some kind of harm to them, you wouldn't necessarily experience the consequences of that immediately. But if you did, like if you did a shitty thing to somebody and then immediately like a bee stung you, every time you did something mean to somebody, you would make the connection. But because that's not the case, because we don't spontaneously experience the consequences of our actions, there's this time lag. And during that time lag, a lot of the matrix with which we've been programmed involves rationalizing our harmful behavior. And thus, when the negative consequences come, we're kind of like, why is this shitty stuff happening to me? Because it didn't happen right after we did the shitty thing that we did. So it takes time to piece it together. We really have to apply our logic and reason to the series of effects that we set into motion when we do things. And that's why this book is so valuable, because I talk about the fundamental aspects of selecting the thought patterns and emotions and behavior that you agree with and nourish in yourself. Because essentially, you have to apply the pillars of enlightenment to your thoughts and emotions and behavior all the time. Like I talked about in the first episode of the show, if you want to align with natural law, and everybody does, because if you don't align to natural law, you suffer, period. You have to apply the crucible, do no harm, take no shit, to everything that you think and feel and do. Everything that you think and feel and do has to be within that crucible of do no harm and take no shit. If you don't, you're going to experience consequences that you're not going to like very much, because those consequences are specifically divinely orchestrated in such a way to provoke you to examine your behavior and remedy it. It's really beautiful, honestly, the way that natural law operates, because it shows you through the divine intelligence of the cosmos how, when you're doing something in conflict with the laws of nature, how that is something that you have to remedy. And then it'll, when you recognize it and you decide, okay, I want to do better, then it'll show you how. So the principle of cause and effect. There is a delay between cause and effect, which is where a lot of evil stems from. You do a shitty thing, and then if you spend the whole time rationalizing that thing, then when the negative consequences come, you don't attribute it to your shitty behavior. This delay is something we need to be mindful of. We need to take note of how, when we do shitty things, this chain of events happens, and then this thing happens that exemplifies our shitty behavior. So, in regards to the principle of cause and effect, what we really have to take note of is that these two separate planes, the causal plane and the plane of effects, are distinctly different in that the plane of effects, or the physical world, there's no power to affect change in the physical world, in the plane of effects. Our free will exists in our choices that we make. And our choices really only occur in the causal plane. I mean, once we make a decision before our decision manifests physically. So our power to affect change lies in our choices, our free will choices, which only exist in the causal plane. So let's talk about this a little bit, these two planes, the plane of effects and the causal plane. The plane of effects is the physical world. It's where manifested realities have formed due to their underlying causes. The plane of effects constitutes that which has already occurred. As such, no power to affect change exists in the physical world, because that which has already occurred, this physical world as it is manifest, has already occurred. It can't unoccur. It has become that which is, or truth. The physical world is truth manifest. Human consciousness has, in large part, been trapped in the physical world, in the plane of effects, which has essentially rendered us powerless. We've been programmed to focus our time and energy and attention on the plane of effects, where we're completely unable to affect any change. In other words, humanity as a whole remains ignorant of the underlying causes which they themselves set into motion and which lead to self-inflicted suffering in their lives. The plane of causality is where causes are set into motion prior to manifesting as formed realities. This plane of causality constitutes the causal factors, or the why, which underlie and precede all manifested things and events. All power to affect change lies in the causal plane. In order for human beings to understand the causal factors of the conditions which they are collectively manifesting in their lives, we must move from the plane of effects to the plane of causality. Only by making that move can we as a species become conscious co-creators of our shared reality rather than unconscious victims. The seventh Hermetic principle is the principle of gender. Gender manifests in everything. Everything has its masculine and feminine principles. Gender manifests on all planes. Mental gender is the state of coexistence between the masculine and feminine aspects of the human mind. Our left brain hemisphere largely facilitates the masculine aspect, which is the intellect, linear thought processes, logic, analysis. The right brain hemisphere largely facilitates the feminine aspect of the mind, the intuition, creativity, compassion, holistic thought processes. And the eighth, what Mark Passio calls the lost principle, what we can think of as the unifying principle or the generative principle, from the Latin genere, which means to create. This principle is what binds the other seven principles together. This unifying principle is what knits these different aspects of creation together. This unifying principle is care. Care is what you give your attention to, what you focus on. Your efforts, where are they directed? That's care. What we care about on a daily basis acts as the driving force of our thoughts, our emotions, and our actions. Therefore, care can be seen as the ultimate generator of the quality of our experiences. And there's a very simple process that I practice, which has allowed me to very quickly tune in to the act of aligning my thinking, my emotions, and my actions together so that they're all, so that I'm caring about the same thing in my heart, mind, and guts. And that's really what it is. The heart, the Hridayam, is the center of our being. If you know a little bit about the seven chakra system, you know that there are 3 chakras below the heart and 3 above the heart. The heart is at the center of our being. And there's many reasons for this. The heart is far more a majestic form, a majestic place, temple than we think of it according to mainstream rhetoric. This place at our center is where our entire being unfolds from. And it is my thinking that the heart has the laws of nature written upon its interior, and that our intuitive mind, in alignment with the laws of nature, is constantly emanating from the heart. And that's where care originates from. All of our attention, all of our efforts, they come from the heart. So in order to align oneself with natural law, and not just natural law, but with their vision, their path, their way of being in this life that is going to orient them toward right action that will affect positive change in the world. That's all coming from the heart. And the next step in the process, after being after emanating from the heart, is to move up into the mind, where knowledge is contained. So from the heart into the mind to acquire and align with the proper knowledge, and then into the guts, which is where action springs forward from. Heart, mind, guts. Care, knowledge, actions. That's all I got for you today, boys and girls. Thanks for tuning in. Feel free to watch again and again until you get it. This is core stuff. This is absolutely essential stuff. The stuff that I just described to you is stuff that we're going to need to integrate. The stuff that is required of us to integrate and put into practice in our life. These Hermetic principles and the unifying principle will serve to orient you toward natural law, tune into it, and align yourself with it through your thoughts, emotions, and behavior. Jordan Peterson said something along the lines of, aim at the highest good you can possibly imagine and move in that direction. Then you're in paradise. Well, knowledge of natural law, as I've presented it to you, will give you a lens with which to examine the highest good you can possibly imagine. Then you could start walking towards it in paradise with me. Much love to you all. Take it easy. I'll see you next time.